Hi.
To start off with, would you like to just say your name and where you are right now?
Sure. My name is Sarah Park, and I'm in, well, we call it Central Coast, California. Although if you look on a map, it's not super central, but we're central. We're right between LA and San Francisco, about 3.5 hours each direction. So we're
Ooh.
central to those.
Hmm. And that's a part of California that is not currently on fire?
No, we've experienced a lot of the smoke at
Mm.
times. At one point, about a month and a half, 2 months ago, we had the worst air in the world for about a week. I was like,
Wow.
oh, this is horrible. We're not used to that. And so it gave me a lot of empathy for places that experience that more frequently. But yeah, so we're not on fire, and
This is
that's a
good.
win.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's scary to watch that from afar and just not know, who it's hitting, but be very aware that they're real people and they're very
Yeah,
affected. So,
it has been scary.
hmm. Well, since we've established that, I guess you probably know by now the first major question is who are you? Who are you as a person, as a human being? Your values, your passions, your qualities, whatever you'd like to say about yourself.
Yes, I knew that one was coming, and I was like, "Geez, that's such a huge question," which, I mean, I know you know that. But,
It's fun though. It's like,
yeah, it is. There's so many angles, but, I think a big part of who I have been is, um, someone who's really invested and passionate about psychology. Um, I decided when I was 12 I wanted to be a psychologist.
hmm,
That's kind of a rare age, I think. And part of that was there was this radio show in Los Angeles called Loveline. They also did like an MTV show, so other people may have seen it at some point, but they would play this game that now in retrospect is like horrible, but it totally fascinated at me at the time, where like somebody would call up and it was like a love, sex, and drugs sort of like advice line, whatever. And so they started playing this game when somebody would call up with a certain type of question, usually sexual in nature, and had kind of like a voice younger than their age often, so like a real kind of baby voice. And then they would put them on hold and they would guess at what age they were likely messed with, meaning like molested. Like
wow,
that.
yeah, there's some things you can't get away with doing on the air anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Like in retrospect, not such a great situation. However,
Fascinating experiment for psych students to practice with, but yeah.
yeah, yeah, lots of concerns.
Okay.
um,
So you
but
you were listening to this as an
yeah, at like
impressionable young
12.
child. Okay.
Yeah. And I remember recognizing that they were often very right. The person would get on the line and be like, wow, how'd you know? Yeah. Um, and it started kind of my first like rudimentary theory was kind of like, all right, so this thing happens and there are just a limited amount of ways people respond to that, and we have common ways we respond to these like things. And I was like, that's really cool, I want to understand that. um and so that's kind of what got my head going in that direction. I was like, what kind of people do that? And I was like, oh, psychologists do that sort of. So
Mhm.
that's kind of part of what got me going in that direction.
Hmm.
I mean, I'm also, I've got a family history that I often joke, I'm not a psychologist by accident. Many of us have histories that head us in a certain direction,
Mhm.
and came from a family that really valued education.
Hmm.
And so, it was never a question of do you go to college? It's which college and for what and for how long. Which, as someone who grew up with a learning disability, dyslexia was tough because school was always hard. um, but later on, when I was tested again in college for my learning disability because I needed some accommodations, I then found out, yes, I do have a learning disability, but also my IQ is fairly high. And so it helped me understand why I was often bored and challenged.
Mhm.
Like this very like funky sort of,
Yes, welcome to the 2E club.
yeah, it's like, oh, geez, this is hard.
Mhm.
Yeah, it did help me make a lot of sense of my experience when I got that data. But I did, I ended up, I did a pretty straight line, which I think again is uncommon. I did spend my first 2 years of college in England, and then took a year off because I was kind of burnt out on school and moved like 6 times in a year. I moved back to the States, moved to Seattle, moved back, lived in all these apartments. It was quite a year. But then went back to college and then went to grad school, and um, then like found myself at 30 and graduated with a doctorate with like, well, what the heck do I do now? This has been what I've been aiming for since I was 12. I didn't think of the rest of it. Do
Oh,
I just work a
oh,
lot?
that part.
Like what happens now? Everything else was kind of set in front of me.
Hmm.
So that was that was a bit of a meltdown, uh, exploration time in my life for sure.
Mhm.
And I
And
feel
so
like a lot
how
of
have you
people,
reorganized yourself after that?
um, well, at the time, I kind of blew up my life. I broke up with my partner, who I'd been with for 7 or 8 years at that point. Um, I had gotten a job in a new state and a new city. I lived in Knoxville, Tennessee. Um, I started going to CrossFit. Like, I don't know, I just, kind of tried to figure out what I wanted. My partner and I actually did end up getting back together, which I was really, that's the first time I've ever done that, is broken up with someone and got back with them.
Hmm.
But I think it helped reorganize our relationship in some ways that have been really useful. Um, I'm with him, married to him. I've been with him for 16 years now, besides that 6 month break. Um, but I think it also helped me to, there's a lot going on. I was transitioning to a new city. I was transitioning to a new identity as a professional and not a student. Transitioning to what do I want now? And I think I still am. So we moved to California again. We were both native Californians, in 2015. And I worked in college counseling for a lot of that time, like in Tennessee and here. Um, and I had always joked that my education was my baby. Like, I gave birth to my dissertation. It really was painful, and so I always joke that that's what, you know, I don't know, like that was my focus, and my career was my purpose. And then every woman around me started having babies.
Hmm.
Like I worked with, I mean, seriously, like there's maybe 7 women that went on maternity leave in a year. Like it was insane. Um, and so it's not like I never liked children. I actually really love children. I had worked at a summer camp, but I have a brother who's 7 years younger than me, and I played a big role in helping to raise him. I'm good with kids, but it was just like, I don't know, I felt like I was doing something else.
Hmm.
I was really focusing on my career. It's something I had hoped for and dreamt of since I was a little girl, pretty much. And so that shift, though, of being with my friends' kids and watch my dog be with their kids. Oh my gosh, all my dog wants to do is lick their faces, and
Oh.
and it is the cutest freaking thing. It's very overwhelming for kids who aren't familiar with dogs, and I'm like, sorry, but it's so cute. And and so that meant that my husband and I talked about, kind of, well, this wasn't on our radar. This wasn't what we're gonna do with our lives. And he had had testicular cancer at a really young age, like very
Mm.
early 20s, which meant that our kind of only option for a biological child was in vitro fertilization using his like preserved sperm. And so we went down that road, and IVF, anyone who's going through it is amazing, because that hormones are real.
Oh, they're
Hormones
a
are
thing. Yeah.
impactful. And I have never felt so crazy in my life. um,
Yeah.
and yeah, we did about a year of that and we're not successful. And I just couldn't do it anymore. It really, it was just too much. Financially, emotionally, I didn't want one more stupid shot, like, all that stuff. And um, so I took a break and really kind of grieved that and kind of tried to figure out what's next. And so we are now in the process of trying to adopt.
Wow.
And so I grieved a lot that year. And then now we're hopefully going to go live with like an adoption sort of, there's a profile that'll be posted. And there's a lot that goes into that process, but hopefully by the first of the year. And so for me, that represents such a huge shift in how my identity, what I'm valuing. Like, I still very much value my work. I love my work. I work with veterans now. I work at for the VA.
Wow.
And in 2016, I started a private practice with a good friend of mine. And one of our big focuses is on transgender treatment care, um, writing letters for medical procedures, gender affirming medical procedures. We have a postdoc. So, I mean, I feel like my work life is really rich, and I really
Hmm.
do love what I do. And I feel like I'm really in a place of wanting more balance, of wanting to nurture the relationships and things in my life, including having another tiny human to nurture.
Wow.
Um, so I don't know, that's a lot, but that's
No, that's a lot. And it's I think honestly you're the first person to talk about anything related to infertility.
oh
And everybody, who's talked about their children has done so very lovingly, which is
mhm.
great. Because, yeah, I love my kids, but also, it's not all sunshine and roses, and there's often a lot of pain and there's a lot of loss around the
Yeah,
whole process of coming into that. So I appreciate that you named that. And I
sure.
mean, really good luck. I cannot imagine, like, I know there is preparation and all of that kind of stuff, but I can't imagine not having 9 months to adapt myself to somebody
Right.
showing up and getting a call. It's like, ta-da, you have a child. I was like, I don't know if I could deal with that personally.
I mean, it's, yeah, how they talk about it is, so the agency we have is national throughout the US. And so they can call us and say, okay, there's a mother heading to the hospital. I mean, it could happen anytime in her process, but
Hmm.
one option could be there's someone heading to the hospital. She wants to choose you as her family. Do you want to say yes to this? And if you do, then you need to be there within 24 hours. And
Wow.
it's like, well, hold on, clients. How am I going to deal
Yeah,
with
sure.
all
In the middle of a pandemic, that sounds really simple.
right,
What
exactly.
complications could possibly come up?
No, it's not like my husband has a history of cancer that we should probably be concerned about with traveling with COVID or anything
Yeah,
like that. So
that's a
it'll be,
lot.
yeah,
Yeah.
it'll be interesting.
Hmm.
And I have been really, I wrote a blog post for my practice, and I've recently shared a GoFundMe just because it's really expensive. Um, and I've been really clear about naming the infertility process because I
Hmm.
felt so alone in it and so isolated and so like, why is this impacting me so much? Why do I feel so unbalanced and like people just weren't talking about it. um,
Hmm.
and then I found a friend who was doing it too, and we didn't know we were doing it at the same time because we're across the country and whatever. And it was so nice to hear,
Hmm.
like, yeah, that medication's messed up, or like, this is so hard, or yeah, I cry in the middle of the workday. She told me she emailed everyone she worked with at one point. She's like, I'm sorry, I was a bitch the last 3 months.
Oh,
Like,
no.
she's the sweetest person, and it just made me feel so
Yeah.
much better. And I'm like, yeah, it's something that I feel like is important to share, because there can be so much stigma and feelings of aloneness, and a process that so many people go through.
Hmm.
And I think that sucks. I think there should be more
Yeah.
around that.
Yeah, I mean, I love therapy. I love therapists, but I also really value peer support,
Yeah,
especially because there are some things that, they just don't teach them. So you kind of have to have some lived experience to really
yeah,
get it.
totally.
So, yeah. Hmm. So would you say that out of all of this experience, there's a particular value that you hold in your life, sort of as something central?
Yes, there's a couple that pop up when you say that. Um, and I think they're all interconnected. Um, I think so much from, I feel like the Gestalt community in so many ways parented me. And so I feel like some of those values are really connected in that, the value of authenticity, values of connectedness. And I think even just from my experiences growing up, a real value for doing the right thing, even if it's hard, and advocating for others. And so, like, I think serving the trans community is like a piece of that, and part of why that has become an important part of my practice, and feeling like I can advocate for folks who are being oppressed in many ways, and knowing that my power as a therapist can open some doors for folks who don't have the power to do it themselves because of the very systems we exist in. Um, I think, I mean, even as a teenager, I talked about wanting to adopt. And so I think there's always been a part of me that's just authentically wants to care for people and love people, like, and connect with them.
Hmm.
And I feel like my training and experiences in the Gestalt community have just sharpened that for me and got me
Hmm.
better at that. It's a central, definitely a central part of my life, that like connected
Um,
authenticity.
yeah. Would you say that there's a particular moment or an event or a circumstance that has really clarified for you who you are or influenced you in some very particular way? Beyond that particular radio program, but
Yeah, no. God, I mean, there's so many things that play into that. Um, I think part of it is in my family, I needed to take on a role of probably functioning higher than most kids my age were at various times. And so I often had to, felt the need to advocate for myself, and needing to find the self support to get my needs met in ways that I think sometimes other kids don't. Like, for example, I think it was like fifth grade. I got called into the principal's office because they're trying to transfer me to like a slower, easier class because of my learning disability. I knew I was going to be so bored in there, and this wasn't my first rodeo with this. And finally, I was like, no, I want to struggle in the harder class. I don't want to go there. And just thinking to myself, like talking to this like adult man who's my principal, and being like, nope, not gonna do what you're telling me.
yes,
Um,
I'll plan my own education. Thank you. I'm
yeah,
done.
totally. I got this.
Yep.
Um, and I think as I've grown, I've, wanted to help. I don't think I should have had to do that on my own.
Hmm.
It would have been nice if somebody else was there, and not saying my parents were present, just saying that, there are times when they weren't as present as I probably needed. Um, And so I think that like doing the right thing no matter what and speaking up for myself, I mean, that's such a core piece of who I am.
Hmm.
Um,
And what about people? I mean, you look like you're about to say something else there, but
no, I'm just kind of like sifting through thoughts. So people's a good place to go.
yeah, just who you might have run into, sort of on your, I hate the word journey and path at this point. I don't want to ever say either of them again. But in your life, people who you might have run into who've had a particular impact on you.
Yeah. I think a big one is Todd Burley. So he it, he was sort of my way into the Gestalt community, and it was in grad school. He was a professor at the program I was in, and they had kind of a therapy um, theory series. So like, one quarter you're doing CBT, another quarter you're doing psychodynamic, and then another was Gestalt. And so his was kind of the third in the row, and like each of them were kind of interesting. But he was the only one who did like direct demonstrations in class. And I remember the first time watching it being like, that's therapy. That's what I want to do. I'm like, that is badass. And he's a therapy ninja. That's what I used to call him. Because I'm like, how did you start here and like end up here and they're crying? Like, how did that work? It just felt like magic. And it was the first time that I really felt not only invited, but that it was a requirement that I was myself in order for something to work. And that felt so freeing and so kind of overwhelming, and like, how do I even do that? But then I made my way to the LA Gatla weekend trainings, and I'd be driving home from them bawling from whatever, like,
yeah, I don't think people should be able to drive home.
no, it was a stupid idea. I started getting hotels after a while. Like, I was like, I just know this is a situation. But I would come home, and my husband, he'd be like, why are you going to these things? Why are we paying all this money for you to go to this thing and come home distraught every time? He's like, I don't understand what's happening here. And I was like, that's a fair point. Like, that's fair feedback. But as both of us, as he saw kind of my own sort of progression and being able to be more authentic, more grounded, more and happier, there'd be times when he's like, so when's your next training? You need to go do more of that. get a refresher. He bought in. I bought in, clearly. And it just really felt like a place where I could practice being me, practice being the authentic version of me. And it was whatever that was. Mad, sad, tired, just whatever. And then I started going to the international trainings as well at various times. I think I've been to 5 total. And I did 3 years in LA. And that community is just so rich. I mean, you've already met members of that community. And Todd is the reason all of that happened. He actually, at one point when I blew up my life in Knoxville, I messaged him and I was like, I know this is weird, but will you be my therapist? Because I just need someone, and I'm a mess. And he's like, yes, okay. So I saw him for about a year, but then he got very sick, and had cancer that went into his brain and various other parts of his body, and he passed away, which is very hard. I think is he up here? Oh no, he's on my wall. But
he's still around.
Yeah, no, he's here. Yeah, he I actually have a tattoo for him on my back, and it's 2 circles, and like kind of just right next to each other. One's filled in and one's open. And it's to represent kind of the Gestalt concept of connection and meeting at the boundary. And the filled in one represents him, and the unfilled in one represents me. And it was really special. I got to share it with his wife and daughter because they came to the next residential, and we had a memorial for him. And his daughter really liked it, which made me feel like, okay, good. I'm glad it felt like you also feel like I honored him in a way that you appreciate. So that was very special.
And that's really hard. I know a lot of therapists who have, dealt with their own illness, and some leading up to their own deaths. And it's a big worry of, what's this going to do to my clients? It's definitely a lesson in humanity, but it is very painful.
Yeah, it really is. And it was sudden for everybody. For him, he was traveling to a residential, and he got confused and went to the doctors in, I think it was maybe France, and they were like, you need to go home. And his daughter flew to pick him up. And it was sad. It was very sad. But I did get a really lovely last conversation with him, and still use some of the things he talked to me about, his beliefs about death, in some of my sessions. And he's still in there.
Yeah. Just sitting here. I have a couple of my own therapy buddies, up there. They're around somewhere, but all I have now is their pictures. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So what is it that you would say about Gestalt? I mean, it's not magic and it's not ninja training. Is there a particular thing that you found that you are attracted to or fascinated by, or like, what is the thing for you in Gestalt?
I mean, I think part of it is the goal of authentic connection. I think that's such a beautiful, transformative experience. And I've watched it with not just myself, but with clients and with others. Like, having that experience of someone who will authentically be there with you is just amazing. And I think that's what I've really loved about the community. I think that's also, I mean, it's changed who I am as a person, for sure, or at least set me in a very certain direction of what I want to sharpen and do differently with kind of who I am, like valuing authenticity, valuing connection in a way that I don't think I would have without it.
How would you say that it's affected you? I mean, you're saying how it's changed you and what it's helped you focus on. How has it affected you? Is that a different question, or is that the same?
I don't know.
I mean, how have you been affected by that authentic contact?
Oh, well, I definitely have a much richer life. I found this document that I think was pretty early in my training that I wrote. It was pretty kind of excruciating, where I was writing about feeling like I really couldn't connect with people. And really like I use the analogy of feeling like I'm starving at a buffet and I don't know how to get fed and I don't know how to get that connection. And it was kind of interesting to read. I read it maybe a couple months ago. I found it on my computer somewhere, and it was so alien to my experience currently that I was like, wow, I didn't even remember how hard this was for me. Now I joke it's my superpower. And like, I didn't realize how far I had come. And so I know there's a richness in my life that wouldn't have been there otherwise, both professionally and personally. For sure.
And I can imagine that sort of experience of going from alienation to connection might be very useful for the people that you work with. I mean, both in the trans community and both with veterans who have gone through stuff that just seem to separate people from humanity.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. It is amazing to watch people become their most authentic selves. Like I had this one client who, when they first came in to see me, would never look at me, often end up kind of in the fetal position in my chair,
Hmm.
speak in half sentences, and severely, severely depressed and just cried a lot. I even was kind of considering, are you on this autism spectrum, or, kind of, with that little lack of eye contact and the difficulty communicating. And finally they were like, I think maybe I'm trans. And as I watched her go through that journey, it was amazing what happened. She communicated so clearly. She would look me in the eye. The depression all but evaporated eventually. And I mean, that took time, and it was each little step of her really being her authentic self. It was just so beautiful to witness. And I think trans folks experience that in in a very profound, obvious way that I think we all get tastes of. At least I do, as a cis person, but it's amazing to watch folks in that community really become authentic. I feel very lucky to be witness to that at times. But yeah, I can connect with that feeling of alienation. I just didn't remember how much so until recently.
Hmm. Nice. So, what challenges would you say that you've run up in? I mean, you've spoken of some very personal challenges, but what about in your work or in the Gestalt world?
I think professionally, I feel like people have no idea what Gestalt means
Mm.
often. It's like empty chair, and then that's about it. um, and so, often, like Loma Linda, the program I came from, was very health psychology was a big piece of it because we were connected to a medical school. And so that makes sense. But that's also often a very behavioral sort of place. And there's a lot of value put on that. The grad students who were more into the gestalty humanistic stuff was kind of like, we're the fringe. And I think I felt that in different ways, professionally, like, being a little bit on the fringe. And I think initially that was kind of hard for me. And I think I mean, the VA, like, if you want to talk about a place that wants you to do very behavioral, very like manualized treatment, that's
Yeah.
the spot. And so figuring out how to not dim what I'm doing, but how to make it palatable to different systems so that they can understand, or having bosses that will allow me to just do me and trust that I'm doing good work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and maybe even like figuring out how to explain to colleagues, what it is I'm doing and why. And I'm such a theory nerd. I love theory. And so, um, yeah, so having those conversations, actually, that's the fun part. That's not the challenging part. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think that's sometimes been the challenge. I think the other challenge for me is, because I'm an introvert that can look like an extrovert, I can, it can really tire me out. It's a lot of energy to authentically bring yourself and hold that space. It just is. And I would have it no other way, but on your sixth or seventh client of the day, it's like, oh geez, this is a lot.
That's a lot of being me, fully present.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'd like some Netflix and a glass of wine, thank you.
Yeah.
So I think that's the other challenge.
Now you get to negotiate that, with a child, hopefully.
Yeah, exactly.
So
That's
the
kind of
compromise is cartoons on Netflix and some cookies.
I'll take the cookies, that's fine. Juice
Ah,
box.
yeah. Yeah. So I didn't ask this directly, but I'm interested in what your answer might be. Some people don't choose to speak to this, but I think for some reason you may have something to say, which is how you experience yourself, going back to something a bit more personal, within your gender, your experience or understanding of yourself, either as a woman or in your gender, however you define it.
Hmm. Yeah, I identify as a cis woman. I have thought about that. I think because of the clientele I've worked with. Um, I think there are some ways in which I am very traditionally feminine, and I'm very nurturing. I'm very mothering. I was the friend in the group of friends who made sure everyone got home safe, after a night of drinks, or whatever. Like I
Mhm.
was always that person. Or if there's a new person at work, like I'm always gonna like pop up in their doorway and see how they're doing. And that's just very much just part of me.
Yeah.
And I think that's the connection and all that good stuff. uh, but I'm also big, and big in ways that often I think is not very feminine. Like I can be pretty direct. Um, and I will fight for things that I think, again, this is the part where fighting for the underdog, or like
Hmm.
doing the right thing, even if it's hard, that part of me, I think, is not very seen as very feminine. I will speak up in a meeting and say, no, that's not true. That's not okay.
Hmm.
Or I don't like that. And I think the Gestalt community has helped me develop that like backbone, but that's so temperamental. Like I can't even tell you. I was thinking of a time, I had a grandfather that wasn't the nicest man. And I remember he was saying something just kind of shitty to my grandma. I don't remember what. And I was like 10 and we're in a restaurant. I remember looking at him and be like, you can't talk to her that way. That's not okay. And like that is such a good illustration of just kind of who I am, um,
Hmm.
on many levels, like just very straightforward and direct, and like, this isn't okay, if something feels not okay.
Yeah, and it's interesting that these come up around the question of gender, which I guess makes it a context question. It's like this is who you are, but then
Mhm.
it's what society expects you to be as a cisgendered woman.
Right, exactly. And
Hmm.
it's like, I feel lucky to have been born a woman in many ways, because I think we have a lot more flexibility in our gender expression, in some ways. But I also know that as cis women, we do experience our fair share of oppression, and um,
Yeah, there's a bit of that still out there.
yeah, that happens too. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers it all, but answers some of it maybe.
Yeah, no, no, definitely. And I mean, these are very gestalty questions, and it's not like there is an answer, and I have no expectation. So I'm just curious about what pops up.
Sure.
So I guess really the last thing that I think I would ask is, where you're going next, what your plans are, if there's a particular project that you're developing, and also where you think Gestalt could or should be going from here.
Mm. Um, so I've got kind of a plan. You should be shocked by that by now, that I have a plan for my life. I've developed one now.
Is this the one that started, when you were 12 and a half?
Right, exactly. But so I'm going to be at the VA for probably about 3 more years, which is when I should be done with when I should be able to access, depending on if it holds and the US doesn't totally fall apart, for student loan forgiveness, because I took out lots of loans for my graduate education. And so if that comes through, then I would really like to focus on just doing my private practice. I really love my practice. I love my partner. I love training within my practice, and the community we serve in that context. And so that's what I hope to transition to,
Hmm.
which also will give me more flexibility as a parent, as far as, building that schedule. And so making that an important priority, obviously, in my life. My husband and I bought our first home kind of in preparation on some level for potentially having a child. And it's the first time we've been able to really dig in and make a place our own. And that's
Hmm.
so cool. Like we both really enjoy that process. We love puttering around the house and gardening and painting a room and building a thing together. So I'm hoping for more of that. Just more, and like just feeding more of the creative side of me. Like I've said this recently. I'm tired of trying so hard. Like I don't want to go to a bunch more therapy trainings, even though they've been so important to me and I love them. I don't want to invest a bunch more in my identity as far as like I'm good where I'm at in my level of investment in my professional identity, and I'd like to shift even some of that to other parts of my identity.
Hmm.
Um, I feel like I just want something more rich, more multidimensional. And so that's part of the adoption is wanting something more. Um, and then as far as the Gestalt community, gosh, we need to do more research, which I'm sure is a common one people say. And
Several people have noticed that.
yeah, and better PR or something. Maybe that goes hand in hand with the research. But the thing I feel like I've noticed in the field, because I've been able to do a lot of training with folks who are in various training programs across the country, is a real lack of grounding in theory and a big grounding in technique. So people are doing all these techniques, but they don't really have the grounding in theory. And I think that is so valuable. Like part of why I say hard things to clients that maybe it'd be more comfortable for me to avoid that, is because I know it works. I understand it from my theory and why I'm doing this with you. If I don't have that, I wouldn't say the hard thing. I wouldn't do the hard intervention. Like, so I feel like Gestalt and the therapy world in general, like they need us. They don't know how much they need us. And really like continuing to like disseminate, like in whatever way we can, PR or research or whatever, naming what we're doing, not hiding, because I think sometimes we hide because of what I mentioned about different people valuing or not valuing the name. So yeah, I don't know. I think those are some pieces. I don't know how to do it. I'm doing the best I can in my corner of the world.
Yeah, no, I think all of that is very important and on different levels, in different contexts, and in different places. But I
Yeah,
definitely agree with everything that you're saying.
yeah.
So, yeah. Wow. Is there anything else that you feel like we've missed? Is there anything else you'd like to add at this point?
No, I don't think so. I know now I'm like sitting here and totally wanting to interview you.